Okay, welcome everyone to the 34th Annual Forum on Tolerance. I'm Lori Carlson. I'm the chair of the Forum on Tolerance. I'm going to welcome up Professor Yusuf Hayes, who's going to say a couple of things of a day of peace he's planning, and then we'll kick off the forum. Thank you.
Keep that applause going, but for yourselves for being here tonight. You came to the right place. I have my Earth Day shirt. And someone said, Yusuf, it's the wrong day. And I said, well, I'm doing my part for the Earth by just wearing the same clothes all week, right? So you should have got a flyer for this event, Path of the Peacemaker. It has Gandhi on the front and a schedule of events on the back. Do you want the good news or the bad news about the peace event? Which do you want first? The bad news, there's not going to be any coffee there, all right? Good news, lots of chocolate, right? So Friday night is kind of a spiritual activism night. What's it like to be someone working for peace in the world, in the trenches, putting yourself on the line? What are the challenges and benefits of that? And then Saturday morning is about inner peace, right? How do you balance this yang and yin elements of working for peace? So please get a flyer. If you have questions, send me an email. I hope to see you next weekend, Friday night and Saturday. I want to bring up one of my mentors, Dr. Sheldon Brown. Please give him a big round of applause.
Thank you, Yusuf. I'm a professor retired and a member of the Forum on Tolerance Committee and former chairperson of the Forum on Tolerance. I've been given the honor of introducing our guest presenter at NSCC's 34th Forum on Tolerance. He is Dr. Sehdev Kumar, who teaches at the University of Toronto, Canada, and is world-renowned as a philosopher, historian, and scholar. My wife, Fran, and I met Dr. Kumar in 2014 on a cruise where he delivered several stimulating and impressive lectures. One in particular caught my attention. It was on forgiveness. That topic is close to my heart because I have taught my NSCC students for many years about forgiveness in my course, Literature of the Holocaust. Our textbook was The Sunflower, written by Holocaust survivor Simon Wiesenthal. In The Sunflower, Wiesenthal describes his own experience after being liberated from his last Nazi death camp, of being asked by a U.S. Army officer to make a hospital visit to a dying Nazi soldier who requested to speak to a Jew. After Wiesenthal arrived at the hospital, the dying Nazi asked Wiesenthal to forgive him for burning alive an entire village of Jews. The soldier, terrified of dying with his burden of guilt, begged forgiveness from a Jew, Simon Wiesenthal. To find out what Wiesenthal did, I recommend that you do read the book, The Sunflower. When I asked Dr. Kumar if he would be available to speak at North Shore, he graciously agreed. Tonight, Dr. Kumar will share his thoughts on the power of forgiveness, time to remember, time to forget, from fear to forgiveness. Dr. Sehdev Kumar.
Humanity, it is a plural, it's not a single, because it does not refer to only one kind of thing, it refers to many shades of humanities. So we call humanities is the great gift of all of us to our own creation in the arts and literature. So the word human and humanities and humane have great implication, because again and again we keep wondering who is human and who is not human. Let me mention to you, just about 500 years ago, when Christopher Columbus arrived in what he thought was India, and he started calling the people there Indians. And he was not sure, the people, Spaniards, were not sure that these people they have discovered, are they human or are they not human? This debate went on in the Catholic Church for over 55 years. Are these people human or are they not human? Because if they are not human, how can you convert them into Christians? And if they are human, how can you treat them so inhumanly? So it was not until 1555 that it was finally decided, yes, they are human, and therefore they can be converted. So again and again, this question comes up, who is human? And how can we recognize their humanity and respect them as though they are like ourselves? I came to Canada many years ago at the age of 21. Before I came to the West to study, I had never met a white person. I had never seen a black person, an African person. I had never seen a Chinese person or a Japanese person. The only people I saw were about 50 shades of brown. That's what my experience. And then suddenly, it was as though a new exposure to a new people who seemed quite human like me. I remember very first time I met a person who was Muslim. It was in a small place called Prince Edward Island in Canada. And at that time, I was 28 years of age. I had never met a Muslim. And I thought in my own mind, perhaps Muslims have little horns growing out of their heads. And when I met him, and then over the next 2 or 3 years, we became very close friends, suddenly I realized that he's as much human as I am. And it takes, like all of us, takes a bit of an effort, takes your own humility to say, what is human? One of the questions that comes up again and again, who is a stranger and who is my neighbor and who is my brother? In many traditions, not just only Christian traditions, we often talk about me, I am my brother's keeper. This arises out of sympathy, out of empathy, that we are related to each other, as we may be related by blood. So this sympathy arises out of this notion that we belong to a family together. In 1950s, there was a wonderful exhibition that opened in New York at the Museum of Modern Art called Family of Man. There were about 550 photographs from 70 countries of the world in which there are pictures of people, women, children from China and India and Mexico and USA and other parts of the world, their childhood and their expressions of love and hatred and envy. And suddenly it felt like really the human family was one family. It was a family. So it was called the Family of Man, the exhibition, and then it traveled all over the world. So this question again becomes, what is a family, and is it a functioning family? It is a dysfunctional family, but we are a family. There is a lovely line by one of the great poets, English poets, W.H. Auden. He says, you shall love your crooked neighbor with your crooked heart. And you shall love your crooked neighbor with your crooked heart. Whatever we are, learning to accept the other like yourself in a truly great step forward. I want to refer to you a beautiful painting, perhaps many of you know. It is a painting by Leonardo da Vinci called The Last Supper. It was painted soon after Columbus discovered the New World, from about 1495 to 1498. It was painted over a period of 3 years in a refectory in Milan, in Italy, in a church. This story goes, and it's a legend, may not be entirely true, but a wonderful, beautiful legend, that Leonardo da Vinci wanted to paint, the very first painting he wanted to, in the portrait he wanted to make in the painting was of Jesus Christ. And he went on the street of Milan looking for somebody who would be like Jesus Christ. Now, who has seen Jesus Christ? Nobody has seen Jesus Christ. There are no photographs of Jesus Christ. There are no films anywhere. So it's in our mind that who Jesus Christ might be. When an Indian painter in India makes Jesus Christ, he makes him look brown. He makes him look like an Indian. When a Swedish person makes Jesus Christ, he makes him blonde. So here was Leonardo da Vinci looking for somebody who's kind, compassionate, loving, full of divinity, whatever we associate with a wonderful creature called Jesus Christ. So when he finally found this man, this person on the street of Milan, he asked him, "Would you be my model for Jesus Christ? I'm painting the Last Supper." And Da Vinci was a famous man by that time. And this man said, "Maestro, I'm flattered. Of course I'll be your model." So he made Jesus Christ, and then a year, 2, 3 years passed. Other characters in the painting were finished. And he now looking for somebody who would be the character who will be for Judas. And again he went on the streets of Milan looking for somebody who could be Judas, who's mean, shifty, unreliable, untrustworthy, who could betray the master. And so where do you find one? So after many days' search, Leonardo found somebody lying near a gutter, drunk, all disheveled. And he thought this man could be the right man for this role. So he tapped on his shoulder and said, "Come with me. Would you be Judas for my painting?" He says, yes, I will be. "So give me some money." He said, "Give me some money for drink." So they're walking, and this man is walking behind him. He asks for more money, and then he taps at Leonardo's shoulder. He says, "Maestro, perhaps you don't recognize me. Last time I was Jesus for you." In some ways, that story, as I said, it may be a legend. I have talked to many scholars who have studied Leonardo da Vinci's work. But it may be a legend, but a wonderful legend. That in some ways, there is a great closeness between what we consider the character of Jesus and what we consider a person who's betrayed the great master. Because then really a recognition of a divinity, of a spark that runs through all of us. Today is a special day, and I start my presentation by referring to this great genocide that started exactly 100 years ago, on the 23rd of April, 1915. This genocide, about 1.5 million people were killed by the people of the Ottoman Empire. And to this day, many people of Turkey deny that this happened, or happened to the extent that it is supposed to have happened, about 1.5 million people. And it stays as a source of great pain in the hearts of those who suffered. It's a memory that doesn't seem to go away because it is a memory that remains unacknowledged. So many people say, and the Pope has recently declared that this was the first genocide of the 20th century. This is not quite so. Unfortunately, we have other genocides in the beginning of the century. There was one genocide committed by Germany in Africa, in the present-day state of Namibia, country of Namibia, where a lot of people were wiped out is considered the first genocide. And then there was another genocide committed by Belgium, by King Leopold, for it went on from 1880s to 1908, in which it is said and estimated and calculated to be more than 10 million people were killed in Congo. So it is not quite fair to compare one Holocaust with another Holocaust. The fact is that we have a long history of not accepting others and being intolerant of others. And so this particular day, commemorating the beginning of this great genocide in Armenia, and the memory of it becomes even more painful, because it continues to be unacknowledged to this day. So many people, some of the writers in Turkey who have tried to write about it and tried to expose it, they have not been treated very kindly by the powers that be. So it becomes more hurtful when somebody does not acknowledge what is happening there. Now, as I said, there was also a great genocide in Congo, present-day Congo, in which literally, for the sake of rubber tapping and the incredible amount of wealth that Belgium and particularly King Leopold had collected, so there were many times, as a sort of punishment, their arms and feet were cut off. And so it's a history of torture and utter intolerance that can be traced. Now, I mentioned the great Armenian genocide. But what happens when there is no historians writing about it? When the stories of our own personal history, in which pain is experienced not by a group of people who write about each other, or their historians, or their archives, material is collected, museums are created, and then their discoveries keep going on. There are at least 100 books written on the Armenian genocide. What happens if it happens only to us? Who writes our history? Where does it go? Well, it stays in our head and keeps corroding and keeps destroying us. And that is in some ways the most painful aspect of our own story. Where does it go? And many times it is said that human beings talk more to themselves than they talk to other people. So what do we say? Who are we talking to? What are we saying? Because it is a way of coping with things that have remained unresolved. The things of pain and resentment and anger and frustration are something people have done to each other, and they just don't go away. I want to give you 3 examples. Because sometimes we all are human, or not all of us luckily have experienced Holocaust of one kind or the other. But we have all experienced pain and resentment and hatred and denial of our humanity at some stage or the other. So I want to give you 3 examples. First, this beautiful line, one of the most wise things that ever written, from Gospel of Thomas. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. So, cleansing our own minds, cleansing our own unresolved conflicts, cleansing our own resentments is crucial to seeking human freedom in the best sense of that word. So here I give you an example of 3 faces of Eve, 3 examples from 3 women. First example I bring to you, a personal example. I was at a seminar, a 3-day seminar on forgiveness and personal history in Toronto, and there were about 150 people attending it. And each one of us, bringing our stories, what happened to us in our childhood, what happened to us later, how we coped with it, how we became whole again, how we became free of the resentments and hatreds that had otherwise enveloped us. So on the 3rd day, one woman came to the front of the group, and by the time she came there, she was already sobbing. You could see how nervous she was and how painful she was. So she came there, and she's sobbing again, and there were about 150 of us listening to her. And she said, I cannot hold it back anymore. I have been holding it for more than 50 years. She was 54 years old. She said, when I was 4 years old, I was assaulted by my grandfather, sexually assaulted by my grandfather. And that she said, I have never shared it with anybody. And then, a few years later, she said, my father assaulted me. And now she says, I am married, I have 2 sons, I have a husband, but I look at every man as a potential rapist. And I cannot relate, I can never open my heart to anybody. I thought to myself, listening to her, it was a hot summer day, but there was a chill in the air. But listening to her, I felt this woman could easily live to be 80, 90, maybe even 100. And she'll carry this pain in her heart for the next 30, 40, 50 years. Unless she learns to redeem herself. And how does one learn to redeem yourself? This pain of not trusting a man, a male, and the pain she had suffered at the age of 4. There were no physical scars on her. There were no physical scars, fortunately. But there were scars on her mind, on her memory. And every time she saw a man or came close to a man, those scars came back, and it made her not fully human and not fully a full human being. And so for the next many hours, we were discussing, as we were sharing, all of us were sharing our pain in one way or the other, saying that really the real pain, the real battle that goes on for many of all of us is our inner battle. How to become whole so that we can move on. Now the example that comes to my mind often, I don't know about here in Boston, but in Canada, we get a lot of cold. And in the winter months, you have some of the beautiful rivers, they get frozen. And in the summertime or the springtime, the same rivers are so wonderful, and you sit there and they're moving fast. And suddenly in this winter, the river is frozen. I said something same happens to human beings. Through our winter of discontentment and unhappiness and resentment, the great river of life becomes frozen. It just doesn't bubble anymore. It doesn't give joy to us. And suddenly it's frozen. And so how to unfreeze it and how to move on. So this was an example of this 50-year-old woman that came to my mind and has stayed with me all these years, that really it is a duty, almost a duty to ourselves, almost a spiritual duty for each one of us, how to learn to cleanse ourselves so we can move on and feel the sense of the spring and the summer of a beautiful river. Now, do you recall this picture? Some of you may recall this picture. This is in June 1972 in Vietnam. It's probably the most transforming picture in the history of the Vietnam War in Vietnam, of a little girl, a 9-year-old girl. Her name is Kim Phuc. She came out of her home and all naked, running on the street, and because she was burning with napalm burns. Napalm gas was released on this village. And many people, including President Nixon, when they saw this picture, they said, it can't be true. It must be doctored. It must be if somebody is dead, played around with it in a studio and created it. But this became the turning point in the history of Vietnam War in Vietnam. And both sides trying to misuse it, abuse it, and try to get more political mileage out of it. But what happened to this woman when she grew up? What happened to this girl when she grew up? Well, let me tell you what happened to her. On the right is her. She's 54 now. I had the privilege of meeting her in Toronto. She lives in Toronto, in Canada. Her scars are still there. They remind her every moment. It reminds anybody else who comes close to her. Look at her back, completely burnt, and the scars from those burns. But over the years, she transformed herself. She has become a representative for UNICEF. She's become an ambassador for UNICEF. And she speaks in many conferences about forgiveness, about forgiving the man who supposedly was the person who released the gas. And the man who released the gas, one Mr. Plummer, went through his own hell when he saw the picture. And he suffered from it. He became alcoholic. Then he was drawn to religion. He became a minister of church, and so on. Finally, the two of them met each other. And she said, I forgive you. I forgive you. And then she said words, which absolutely wonderful, beautiful words. She says, forgiveness made me free from hatred. I still have many scars on my body and severe pain most days, but my heart is cleansed. Napalm is very powerful, but faith, forgiveness, and love are much more powerful. We would not have war at all if everyone could learn how to live with true love, hope, and forgiveness. If that little girl in the picture can do it, ask yourself, can you? These are her words. As I said, I had the privilege of meeting her at a conference a few years ago. And really, you meet people who are still full of resentment, who never let it go, still anger building up and bubbling in their hearts. And you wonder, where would they go next? What would they do with it? And then you meet somebody who just has moved on to another level of life, as it were. Let me take you to another level now. You may recall, some of you, this amazing tragedy that happened in many countries called thalidomide babies. This was a drug used in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s by many women who were pregnant. It was supposed to cure them of morning sickness. Instead, many children who were born, thousands of them, in the United States, Canada, Europe, many countries in Europe, they were born without any arms, without any legs. And here's two pictures. This little girl, no arms. And then this person here at the bottom, a woman, absolutely nothing but a stump. And this is over 50 years ago, 54 years ago. Now I gave a lecture on one of on the cruises. I was talking about some of the medical experiments that have been performed on many people, what they did. And I was talking about thalidomide babies in the morning. The lecture was about 11 o'clock. And in the evening, on the ship, on the cruise, there was a dance going on. A lot of people dancing, loud music, people having good fun. And then suddenly I saw, in a wheelchair, a woman who had no arms, no legs. And I missed a beat of my heart. I said, this is not possible. I had written extensively about thalidomide babies, but I had never seen one, I never met one. And suddenly I see this woman, a thalidomide baby, and she was dancing in her wheelchair. She had a special motor, and this wheelchair was going round and around and around, and was absolutely mesmerized by it. Incredible energy, incredible beauty. And here, we were going through Panama Canal, one of the great technological wonders of the world, a canal, small canal, that had connected the two great oceans, the Atlantic and the Pacific. And suddenly, looking at this woman, no arms, no legs, no pity, self-pity, but joy, I said, this little stream of life has connected to the great being of life. And I was absolutely in awe of it. And suddenly I felt she's the tallest person in the whole room. And she's the most exquisite dancer there is on the floor. And so you have three people here, three women, more or less the same age, 52, 53, 54, all in some ways scars of something done to them, in this case, thalidomide baby. None of her fault. It happened because whatever happened, the medical. And the second example I gave you of the napalm, and the first. So there are scars, sometimes visible, sometimes just in your memory. But how one copes with it, and how one moves on to another level of being. There is a choice. There is a choice. A choice that a person has made in order to feel free of things that otherwise could destroy you forever. Here is another example I give you from another part of the world, from Japan. Some of you may know, during the Second World War, Japan used a lot of girls, young girls, from many countries nearby as comfort women, essentially prostitutes. As many as about 200,000. They came from South Korea, China, Philippines, Malaysia. And these women of age of between 18 and 23, 200,000 of them. And once the war was over, they went back to their homes. And the unfortunate part of the Asian culture is that once you have been sexually defiled, polluted, they're not accepted by their own family. All these women literally lived underground for the next 50, 60 years. And this went on. Japan never acknowledged it, that such phenomenon existed for the sake of their soldiers. And many other people didn't want to talk about it because they felt embarrassed. Koreans felt, oh, who wants to talk about these women who were prostitutes, essentially? But I'm glad to say, about 10 years ago, a couple of my students at the University of Toronto, of Korean origin, who were doing master's degree in political science, and it came up in one of our conversations, that this is what happened to a lot of Korean women. So these two girls, graduate students, they decided upon themselves, they will find out where are these women in Korea. And for the next 3 years, they made every attempt, every effort, by raising money, by talking to the people in the community in Toronto, in the Korean community. We got to find out where these women are. So they brought 15 of them to Toronto. They were women in their late 70s, 80s, say, come and tell your story before you die. So these women came. And I'm again happy to say that I had the privilege of meeting some of them. And they came, they made paintings, they told their story before television cameras, they told their stories to reporters. What happened? And there was huge pressures built on Japan, say that this denial must not go on. Because it hurts more when you keep denying something that was done and you had hurt so much, rather than offering apologies, so that one can move on. Literally move on. It is the river of life can flow on rather than stay frozen forever and ever. So this is, as this picture says here, 66 years after World War II. So this is the stories that has been sitting. This is the Holocaust, this is the Japanese Holocaust, or Asian Holocaust, as some people call it. Just as the Japanese killed over 260,000 people in Nanking, in the city of Nanking, called the Rape of Nanking, in a period of 3 months. So many of these things remain unacknowledged in many parts of the world, and as unacknowledged, they hurt more. Then another story from another part of the world, from Bangladesh. Bangladesh, some of you may know, was part of Pakistan. West Pakistan. They're separated from each other. And both these countries, Bangladesh and Pakistan, were part of India in 1947. So India was divided in two countries, India and Pakistan, and that Pakistan had two parts to it, what was East Pakistan and West Pakistan, and separated from each other by 1,000 miles. And so East Pakistan, known as Bangladesh, wanted to become a free country. And in 1971, they waged a war for freedom. And so they finally did become a new country. But in the process, a huge number of women were raped, or 3 million of them. Huge number of them. And just as it happened with the comfort women, these women were not accepted by their own community because they were defiled, they are polluted, they are no longer pure women. And so they cannot be accepted as wives and husbands, or as girlfriends, or members of the community. And it was a big attempt made how to reintegrate them in the community, in the life of the society. Some people came forth as an act of patriotism, but otherwise it remains one of the most cruel aspects of what happened to so many women in Bangladesh. Now, let me move on to examples from about children. Because there, as I said, women have been marginalized, have been treated, seen as a booty of war, in a war, and have been raped and destroyed and assaulted in every part of the world for centuries and centuries. And now we are beginning to say this is wrong, this is not acceptable, this is inhuman, this is a crime against humanity, it is not acceptable. And so now I give you an example about children, how children have been used and abused. I give you an example from Canada. These children are called home children. Between 1869 and 1939, beginning of the Second World War, over a period of about 60 years, more than 150,000 children were shipped from England to Canada. These were children who were orphans. These were children who were on the street. These are the wretched slums that Charles Dickens talks about in England. But this is also the period in the 1860s and 70s. This is the height of imperialism, of British imperialism. And so this is the period they shipped these kids, some of them as old as 4 and 5 years old, boys and girls. And they were shipped and they were to be given $3 a year as compensation. And many of them worked essentially in the barns. They plowed the land. They were servants. They had sometimes even winter of Canada and so cold, they didn't even have shoes. And they never saw the inside of a church or a school. There were many girls and boys were beaten and assaulted sexually, and nobody knew about them. Because they were not a community. They were scattered all over the country. They were the cheapest labor that people could find. And these are probably good people. The Canadians are good people. And yet suddenly there is a free workforce coming by the hundreds of thousands over such a long period of time. And so it was only about 10, 12 years ago, somebody set out to find out the history and write a book. And that book came out, it caused an incredible stir. When I talk about it in one or two of my lectures in the ship, many Canadians come to me and say, I never heard of it. What are you telling? I never heard of it. So now, so much it became such a big issue that where are these people? Why were they treated like this? Why were they shipped by England, a country which was probably the richest country in Europe at the time, in many ways? And so the Prime Minister of Canada expressed apologies to these children. And nobody has come forward. Where are they? We don't know where they are. And same way the Prime Minister at the time, Brown of England, expressed apologies, saying this was wrong. This is absolutely wrong, immoral to do what was done to these children. Now I bring you another example of children in residential schools in Canada and elsewhere. These are Indian children, native indigenous populations, who were sent to residential schools run by Anglican Church and funded by the government of Canada. And many of these over decades denied any access to their own culture and their own languages. In fact, they were made to feel that their language is not civilized. Their ways of life are not civilized. They are not human unless they become like the rest of the country, westernized. And then now we have found over the last few decades, so many of these boys were sexually abused by the priests. And the big, huge inquiry going on, Truth and Reconciliation Commission inquiries, and then expressing apologies in the parliament and giving compensations. But the hurt, the deep hurt that has sat there for decades and decades, it is a betrayal of trust when a priest, a teacher, a government official deals with people, children, who are the most vulnerable people in the society, and deals with them in the most heinous way, and say, what does this society do? How do we move on and create on? So these are stories of residential schools that Canada has been coping, and many things been written about in Canada. Now, this one here, I don't know how many people here would know. This is an experiment that went on in Canada, in USA, in the state of Iowa. It was called the Monster Experiment, and it's about stuttering. One of the big debates that has gone on in science, it still continues. What is nature and what is nurture? What is it comes to us from biology? What is part of our genetic makeup? And what is it that culture teaches us? So this debate going on, this went on by a professor of psychology who stuttered. He was quite convinced, he was a professor in Iowa, in psychology department. He was quite convinced that stuttering is not given as part of nature. It is something that is nurtured. So he took, just to prove that point, he took 22 children from an orphanage in Iowa. And then he divided the group in two. None of these children stuttered. But he divided the group into two and made 11 children. Anytime they opened their mouth, he would pick up something about them. And after 2 or 3 years, these 11 kids became stutterers. And they became lifelong stutterers. It's only in 2001, can you imagine, 60 years later, that apologies were expressed by the president of the university, that this is wrong. What was done was unacceptable, that this destroys the life of most vulnerable people. And these are not just kids from the street or kids from somebody's family. They were in the orphanage. They were already children who had nobody really who called them their own. And so this has come to be known as monster experiment, and in which children were, ordinary, regular children were made into stutterers. Now, here I give you a wonderful, different kind of example. Some of you already know about the great the school, in an Amish school in Pennsylvania in 2006, in the month of October. You had this man who used to deliver milk, one Mr. Roberts, and one morning, out of the blue, utterly unexpectedly, he went into the classroom and held 11 or 12 girls hostage. They were young children between the age of 6 and 7, 8, 10. And then he killed 5 of them, execution style. And then he killed himself. Now, why this is not, unfortunately, in the United States, it's not school shootings are not that utterly unique. In that week itself, week of October 2006, there were 3 such shootings in schools in the USA. But this particular example stood out because, firstly, there were 2 sisters who offered themselves that you don't spare somebody else, take our lives. And then one of them was killed and the other was injured. But after the shooting was done, finished, the response of the Amish community was absolutely divine, absolutely incredible, absolutely out of this world. They went, the Amish community went to the funeral of the man who had committed them and expressed sympathy with them. They set up a trust fund for the 3 children of the assassin. They invited the father and the mother of the assassin to their own condolence meetings. And they said again and again, we must not harbor hatred. We must not think of having any hatred against this man who has killed our children. And then 6 months later, they created a new school there called New Hope School. It is probably the most amazing such example of a community and its sense of grace, sense of acceptance of evil, and yet evil separated from the evildoer, and accepting somehow a level of humanity to the extent that this has happened, how do we move on? Indeed, they have moved on. A beautiful film was made on this on this particular example called The Amish Grace. And so something from the disgraceful, an act of utter disgrace to this amazing grace. And truly, I cannot think of any other example in the history of mankind to have a community respond in this particular fashion. I give you some other examples, because history, I'm just taking a period of last 100 years, because this is a special time, I said, with the Armenian massacre 100 years ago. So I'm just trying to see what else has happened in these 100 years. This idea of Chinese head tax. Now in Canada, the Chinese labor was invited to build the Canadian Pacific Railway from one end of the country to the other, one of the most amazing engineering feat, especially railways going to the Rockies and the winter working there. And these people were given often 1/3 of the wages the other white workers were being received. But on top of it, the treatment of the Chinese was brutal. And then there was a head tax imposed on them, which went on till 1922. So there are many Chinese now settled in Canada, and yet again and again over the years I heard them saying that the brutality of it, and then picking only on this particular community, and how this head tax was so high in 1910s or so much so that you could buy a house, 2 houses in the city of Vancouver with that kind of money. Today, you cannot even buy a brick for that money. This idea of singling out a community and the pain and hatred that went on in Canada against this Chinese head tax. The Prime Minister again expressed apologies in the Parliament, and again as a gesture of turning the history around, one of the Governor Generals of Canada, who is a state head, a state figure, it's not a political position per se, it was a Chinese who was appointed, given this position. So this is a way of people remembering and forgetting and expressing apologies, so thawing things and then moving on. So I give examples of collective activities and actions as well as on an individual level. Now, here is an example I bring you from other part of the world, from Ukraine. This place called Katrin, the massacre at Katrin in 1941, in which 22,000 officers of Ukraine were killed, point blank, for a long time. Sorry, it's not Ukraine, it's Poland, I'm sorry. It's Poland. And so for a long time, Polish people were told, again and again, that this was done not by Russia, not by Soviet Union, but was done by the Nazis. It is only after the collapse of the Soviet Empire, it was revealed through a letter that the orders came from Stalin. And then Russia, the new Russia, expressed certain apologies and acknowledgement. It lifted a great weight of the heart and souls of the Polish people, because for so long, over 60 years, it was being denied that Russia had anything to do with it. And now suddenly there was a concrete proof that this is how it all happened. Now, as this was happening, it's interesting. As this was happening, as Poland was discovering its own history, Poland was also discovering something it itself was hiding. And it came out in a play in 2010. The play was called Our Class. It was written, a name I cannot recall very well, but the play was how a group of children who had gone to the same school, lived in the same village, as an act of anti-Semitism, they had hauled up 15,000 people in a village in Poland and set this barn on fire. It was a part of a play, a remarkable play called Our Class, and in which people betraying their own kind, their own friends and neighbors, people they have lived with and went to school with and eaten with and had friendship with. And so there were two things happening at the same time. One, Katian's, this particular event being revealed to the world. How did it happen? Who caused it? And then discovering that how Polish people, one particular village and community itself was engaged in destroying 15,000 people of the Jewish and as an act of anti-Semitism. So each person and each country has many things hiding in its closet. And this idea of being holier than thou, we are better than thou, we are more moral than thou. The more we discover in history, we find that perhaps such assertions are not quite true. Now, let me take you to another example of this Tuskegee University experiment, medical experiment in 1930s. There were 299, almost 300 black people, Afro-Americans, at that time called Negroes. They were suffering from syphilis, but they were not told that they're suffering from syphilis. It was hidden from them. And the idea was, in this experiment conducted over a long period of time, it was told that they will not given penicillin, which is a cure for syphilis, and they were denied it. And they wanted to know how syphilis on its own pace, what happens to it? What happens to the patients? Over the years and decades, only a few handfuls were left. It was only in 1994 that it was through a historian who discovered this experiment and what happened to the people who suffered from it. And when it came out, it was a big anger in the black community in the USA, and President Bill Clinton expressed apologies on behalf of the country that how and certain experiments could have been conducted, which was overtly and clearly racist in nature. And since this Tuskegee experiment has come to be one of the black marks in the history of medical experimentation. And then we have examples of potato famine from Ireland, how the famine that killed millions of people in Ireland in 1840s, that no help came from England, the mother country, to help these people, many times explaining away, that's how nature's laws. This is the area of 1840s, the time when the idea of Darwin had not written his book, but some of those ideas of survival of the fittest were very much in the air, that those people are dying, it is nature's way. And so it was only later, 1990s, that Prime Minister Blair apologized the role England had played, or lack of role England had played in saving these people, Irish people, in the potato famine. But these are things that can stay heavy on people's minds as a community, as a nation, and why were we treated like this? And it can fester for a long time. Festering is... Now, I take you to an event that happened, this is a 1915, a year earlier, 1914, is the beginning of the First World War. It is a war that killed millions of people. It's the most stupid and most brutal war in the history. Millions of people were killed. And you had at Oxford University, the class of 1913, Oxford University was at that time one of the foremost universities in the world. And the students who went there were the cream of the society. The class of 1913, 1/3 of those students died in the war. Graduates died in the war. And so this is the war in which first time you have aerial warfare. You have use of gas, chlorine. You have barbed wire invention. You have invention of tanks. You have trench warfare. And the millions of people who died. And it seemed like really the war to end all wars. And somebody, a soldier who was wounded, he wrote home. He says, nobody won in this war except the war itself. That's what happened. Now, 1919 is after the war was over in November 2000 and November 1918. November 11 is called the Remembrance Day. I chose that day because in a way I say, what should we remember and what should we forget? Because you can keep remembering things and keep festering and keep resenting. And so then what should we remember? And this 1919, for 6 months, there was a treaty that went on. And I must say, one of the great men of the United States who played an amazing role in this was President Woodrow Wilson. And his 14-point plan and his ideas of creating a new world order, creating a League of Nations, and then his extraordinary attempt to see how the people have self-determination in terms of deciding which country they want to live in, and the creation at that time, a new creation of Poland, and countries like, and the end of Ottoman Empire, creation of countries like Syria and Iraq. Iraq, you might think, has been living there. Iraq was not a country at that time. And so the role that played, and 1919 is a vital year, and particularly the first 6 months that this peace treaty went on. Because in a way, we keep placing hope that things will turn around, a new world will come. Because without hope, we cannot live. Without hope, we cannot survive as a human being. We have a sense of hope. And, but as this was going on, something else is happening. In April 1919, height of British Empire, Britain was involved in the war. They're involved in the peace treaty. Something happened elsewhere. And this is this genocide, this massacre in the city of Amritsar in India in April 1919, during the time the peace treaty is going on. And this is a massacre committed by a British journal on people who were just celebrating a religious festival, the Sikh festival, and they opened fire and more than 400 people died, literally within few minutes. Some of you may have seen the film Gandhi. There is a very explicit depiction of that scene. And so this went on, and people suddenly saying, well, what does it mean? You have peace at one level, you're conducting peace in Europe, and here you're killing members, innocent people in your colonies. So the Queen of England visited India 2 years ago, and she, in her queenly way, said, we regret what happened. These things happen. You cannot redo the history. And so she never expressed apologies or asked for forgiveness. But the Prime Minister of England, last year visiting, expressed that this is an awful thing, what went on. So what I'm glad to say, just last month, a statue of Mahatma Gandhi was installed at the Parliament campus of England in London. And it's quite amazing that a man who had struggled to have India win freedom from the British, now his statue is installed there as a symbol of nonviolence and seeking freedom. And his statue is just 50 feet away from Winston Churchill, who absolutely hated Gandhi, who could never stand to see him. So things sometimes turn around in an interesting way. And so there are a new kind of politics, because when we acknowledge something and we see that there is a new people coming on the scene who talk not of an eye for an eye, which can make the whole world blind, that perhaps a new way of relating and connecting with each other. Suddenly, there are three men of that period in different countries. One in your country here, Martin Luther King, who said, I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. And then Mandela in South Africa, who, when he became president and the black majority came in power, it could have been a bloodbath. It could have been, and there were fears. But he chose to take a different route. And then setting up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa under the leadership of Archbishop Tutu, who said, without memory, there is no healing. We remember, so we can forgive. Without forgiveness, there is no future. So there is a memory, but what is it we remember? And what is it we choose to forget? And what is it then we forgive, so we move on? The important thing is that must move on. Life must move on. Because once it gets frozen, everything is dead. Nothing survives. Nothing thrives. So it must move on. I must take you a slightly lighter note. Some of you may remember this show in Disneyland called Honey, I Shrunk the Audience. I was there with my daughters in 2000. There's a millennium, the new millennium was starting. My two daughters, one was 8 years old, the other was 11. The 11-year-old had been chosen as the Millennium Dreamer by the Disney World. So we were there, three of us, and we went to see this show called Honey, I Shrunk the Audience. And I was sitting in the middle, and my daughter, 8-year-old on one side, and my 11-year-old daughter on the other side. There was this show came, and it was the most amazing, horrid show you ever seen in life. You wear goggles, and these vipers coming, and they're all over your feet and legs and your face, and the dogs coming and biting you here, there, and everybody screaming their heads off, and you could feel as though you have goose pimples on your body. And it was a frightening show, absolutely frightening show. And after what seemed like eternity, after it was over, and I could see that everybody's, just so frightened by this. And I turned around to my daughter, younger daughter, Ankita, 8-year-old. I said, Ankita, how come you were not screaming? She said, Dad, I just took my goggles off. I thought that's what really we need all learn to do. What kind of goggles we are wearing that keeps life keeps frightening us. Our life and experiences keep frightening us. If we could just learn to take off certain goggles, because we see the world, all of us, because we always wear glasses to see the world. It depends on what kind of glasses we choose to wear. And if we wear glasses that are love and forgiveness, that are acceptance, accepting the humanity of others and the frailty of others, then perhaps we see the world in one way. If we wear glasses of hatred and resentment and anger and revenge, we see the world in the other way. And then we see everywhere the snakes who will come and bite you. You can feel it on your legs and arms, and you say it is real. Because see, I can feel it on my legs. It is real. So we create a reality. We create a reality of fear. So we move on. So here I give you a biblical example from of Jacob's dreaming on the Jacob's ladder, and how the gods have come down on this ladder. Gods have come down, and angels are coming down, and they're bringing hope and mercy and grace, and they're waking up those who are asleep, they're asleep, spiritually asleep, waking you up to a new reality of love. And this is a theme that runs again and again. One of the greatest artists of the 20th century, Chagall, painted it. Other artists painted it. And it's a theme that keeps running again and again. How can we see the Jacob's ladder in our own lives? How can we see its reality? Things descending, grace descending on us. So there is freedom. But the freedom, like a butterfly, can escape us. I know Americans, perhaps more than any other people in the world, talk about freedom. But freedom is not just external freedom. Freedom is inner freedom. And the freedom to cut the rope and be free. And that ropes, where do they come from? The rope come from because we feel something envelops us. Something, we have a mask that we can't take off. And we feel that there are wolves that occupy our minds. And here is something that comes from a Cherokee proverb which says, there is a battle of two wolves inside all of us. One is evil. It is anger, jealousy, greed, resentment, lies, inferiority, and ego. The other is good. It is joy, peace, love, hope, humility, kindness, empathy, and truth. The wolf that wins, the one you feed. So it is our choice. It is our choice. There is no greater freedom. There is one thing that we enjoy, we all have, is freedom to choose. And that freedom does not come with having a lot of money, driving a big car. That is an inner freedom, a spiritual freedom that we choose. And those who choose, they feel redemption. They feel salvation. And those who don't, they experience hell. So it is a choice. And that's where I end. Thank you. I'll be happy to entertain any questions or remarks or anything else.
Do you agree that forgiveness is a practice more than just, a first initial act?
Say it again.
Do you agree that forgiveness is a practice more than an initial act?
It is a practice. It takes time. It takes time because we are all afraid, distrustful. We feel it is unforgivable. Yeah, it can't be. It is so hideous, and that it can't be ever forgotten. But if you see what future holds, what it can do to you and to the other, then it can be something to cultivate and practice. It's very redeeming.
How would you explain to somebody the value of forgiveness if they saw, that their pain weighed more, so to say? How do you, cover the burden of pain for somebody to let them know that it's worth forgiving?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you too well.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, how do you, somebody that's in pain or that's been hurt, how do you put into short words, why it's worth forgiving somebody?
It works many levels. I gave this example of this 54-year-old woman who said she is suffering this great pain and has gone on with it for over 50 years. And as I said, at one level, there are no physical scars. And the scars the memory of the scar is only in the mind, as a memory. And so how do you then, and the person who did it to her is no more alive, gone, finished, dead. She said he's been dead for 20 years. But by keeping the memory alive, you keep feeding the hatred, the anger. Whereas to let that memory go is really moving on to a different path.
Thank you.
There's something going on in the news right now with this young man, Sarniev. The jury is now trying to figure out what to do. I know we're in the Boston area. There's a lot of anger about what happened during the marathon. I was wondering if you have any comments to make on this.
I don't know this particular case. I have not followed
Okay,
it.
sorry then.
Yeah, I don't know about it. Yeah. I know there are many cases that have come to our attention in the rest of the world. I have been traveling where the shooting of black young men by the police. I know it is an ongoing struggle in this country of race relationships. So my heart goes out to those who seek justice and fairness and equality. It is essential. It is essential. We can't live without it. I feel convinced that anybody, anywhere in the world, who thinks of creating only monolithic societies, where only one kind of people, only one language, one kind of people, one religion, one ethnicity, that is not how the 21st century is going to unfold. We live in a world that will increasingly become multicultural and multi-ethnic and multilingual. In Toronto, where I live, more than half the population of Toronto was not born in Canada. And I'm proud to say that this is one of the most successful experiments in social living in the world. For a long time, people have been indifferent to others. The people have created ghettos. They say, yes, you are there, I know you are there, but I have nothing to do with you, I have no interaction. Now that is not possible. We have to interact with each other. In my classes, many times, there are 20 students, and they're from 20 different countries. So we interact with each other in the classrooms, in our churches and temples, in our shopping plazas, in our coffee shops and pubs. We interact with each other because life is constantly coming in touch with each other. Earlier, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, there could be ghettos in Poland. There could be people say, well, this is untouchable, this is a lowly class, I don't have anything to do with it. So there are slums. And now this is not anymore. People are wishing, asking equality and fairness and a place on the banquet table of history. Truly, I say it in those terms, it is a history has been only for the conqueror, for the rich, for the privileged, and now I say, I too have a place on this, and I must be given a place. So from that point of view, yes, there will be struggle, but those who have not listened to it before must listen to it.
Thank you. Well, just one quick follow-up. This young man was convicted for a terrorist act where people were killed, children were killed, and they're now figuring out whether to give him the death penalty. I was wondering if you have a feeling on capital punishment.
We have almost all Western countries except the United States, and that too for some of the states, not all states, have banned capital punishment since 1970s. I fully support that idea. I feel not that one is not aware of the heinous acts some people have committed, but I feel an eye for an eye is not my way. That's not my way. If we punish somebody who's committed murder and rape and destruction, and then we say, now we'll kill you, that is showing that killing is the way to go. No, I feel we must find ways that are more just and merciful. I feel that justice cannot be blind. Goddess of justice must take off its bandages.
Good evening, Dr. Kumar, Jennifer Harris. We had dinner this evening. I think it goes with this young man's question of sort of what is the motivation to forgive, what are the components. And as you were talking, I was thinking of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how at the top of the hierarchy is the need for self-actualization to be the best person you can be. But before that need arises, other needs need to be met. And it's why we don't see people often wanting to be the best people that they want to be, because there are these precursors, if you will, that make them up, sort of like proteins, if you will, that you have to put together to make this element. What do you think are the components that go into building the blocks to forgiveness?
Thank you. I quite admire Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but I also have a feeling that those hierarchies are not really linear. They work, all of those work more or less at the same time. Sometimes one is more prominent than the other, but they're not just that once this is finished, then I'll come to the next need. My sense of need for forgiveness is that I want to live with freedom. And if anything that obstructs my freedom to live fully, I must attend to it. This is what I see the president of Israel at present. He says, I don't believe in history, I believe only in future. Because history keeps reminding you what did not go right. Future beckons you, say, what would you like to see go right? So if our eyes on future and our eyes to live fully, with full potential of our being, with sense of actualization, in using Maslow's terms, if our goal is there, then we say, what would I let go? What baggage that is holding me back? What would I let go? And I feel truly resentments, anger, small-mindedness, jealousies, they hold you back. They are like you're trying to swim, and they're big, heavy weight on you, and they don't let you swim. So if your goals are clear in your mind, you say, I want to be a full human being. I want to laugh. I want to create joy with those who are with me, and for my children, for my friends, for my students, for my colleagues. So I would let go what is holding me back. So that can be a great motivating factor.
I have a question on how do you feel or understand about different churches and religions that don't acknowledge people and the pain that they cause for those people. I'm thinking of the GLBTQI community and different faith traditions and the damage that they cause, especially to young people.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the history of many religions and has been, for many, has been difficult history. And all religions in one way talk of love and tolerance and compassion and mercy, but they don't necessarily practice it, and they feel perhaps cannot be practiced with people who are not of the faith. That's why I feel a lot of young people feel they do not wish to belong to many organized religions. They say, I'm spiritual but not religious. So I feel really if one could learn to live the words we use and the emotions we use, it'll be a wonderfully liberating thing, because I do believe that in addition to our emotions, to our sense of reason and rationalism that are part of our lives, I feel spiritual well-being is very important, very important. We have not given enough thought to the inner development of our minds, how to change our own perception. There is a lovely line from William Blake, the great 19th century English poet and mystic. He says, "Cleanse thy doors of perception. You will see things as they are, infinite." Cleansing your doors of perception. Really, what does it mean? How to adopt, how to cultivate a new way of looking, a new attitude, a new way of looking at things. And that way needs to be cultivated from the very beginning of life. New way. And a 1-year-old child, 2-year-old child learns how to resolve conflicts, how to deal with envy, anger, or jealousy. These are things that we need to attend all the time in every society. We need to become better human beings. And so religions plays a role, classes play, parents play, our arts and literature play, and they're all very important because we really need to cultivate our mind. And perhaps the way we think of cultivating our gardens, but this is a garden, the greatest garden is inside us, to how to cultivate it. And I do feel that's very important part of the 20th, of our century. And
is forgiveness better a process? Because I think a lot of people forgive because they think it's the nice thing to do, or they want to do the right thing. And you take example something like grief, where anger is part of the process. If you just say, well, I'm going to forgive something that is extremely painful, then you might be neglecting and not being true to yourself by saying, I'm feeling hurt, I'm feeling loss, I'm feeling anger. And, everything you put on this board, if people used anger, there could have been a stop to all these injustices. Forgiveness, I don't think, is always proper. I know like in Rwanda, they're doing this whole peace movement, and who it's helping the most is the children, because they're all going to school with each other. But that's because they don't know anything about the hurt, the pain, the suffering. So that's why forgiveness is important, or there would be no place like Rwanda, So I'm just saying that I think it's a process and one that should be thoughtfully undertaken. Because right now, I'm using my anger to get through a horrendous situation in my life. And I feel like forgiveness would be the nastiest thing I could possibly do.
Thank you. Thank you. Let no one have this notion that forgiveness is easy. I always often think, what if this man, this grandfather who assaulted this girl, if he were alive, if I were to encounter him, I would say, does he have the courage to ask for forgiveness? We not only forgive the other, we also have to have the courage to ask for forgiveness, because it's not only the others have hurt us, we have hurt other people. Okay? We have hurt other people. So asking for forgiveness, just as many examples I gave here of British Prime Minister going to India and say, I ask for your forgiveness. So many times it has tangible expressions. We build a memorial, we build a scholarship, we make a pledge. In this case, they built a statue of Gandhi as a way of commemorating, say, we did this wrong, And here we now acknowledge one of the great leaders of the 20th century who taught us about love and nonviolence. So forgiveness is both asking for forgiveness and forgiving the other. It's not an easy process, far from it. But I feel it's an essential process, both at individual level, collective level, national level, international level. Because there's so many things countries harbor against each other, communities harbor, religious communities harbor. When the Pope went to Jerusalem for the treatment of the Jewish people by the Catholic Church for over 2,000 years, asking for forgiveness, that this was wrong. So it does not change history, but it changes. It changes the future. It changes. And one can be cynical and say nothing changes, people remain the same, they're never going to change. I like to believe that there is goodness in people. And that one can learn to touch that goodness. And that there is a goodness in me, as I see in goodness in other people. Not easy to touch, because we don't know how to touch it many times, but an essential one. There is the great British artist, John Constant. He said once, he's a wonderful artist. He said, I've never seen an ugly thing in my life. He says, with a change in light and a different perspective, everything becomes beautiful. And indeed, the things he painted, you wonder, how does he see beauty in this something so ordinary? And perhaps that is the eye that one cultivates, to see beauty in what seemed quite ordinary. So that's the perhaps message that comes to us from Jesus, that comes to us from Buddha, that comes to us from Dalai Lama, that comes from Martin Luther and many other, Martin Luther King and Gandhi. So I think that's the message. And it's not that the others feel that revenge, anger, indignation, righteous indignation, or that if I do not retaliate, the other thing, I'm weak, and therefore they'll do it again. So there are many responses of this kind. But I do feel that the many more examples out there in which I feel the power of love can be extraordinary.
I just wanted to share something from my personal experience with forgiveness. I found the more I forgave other people, the more I was able to forgive myself. And then with that came acceptance. The more I forgave, the more I was able to accept myself, which eventually led to true self-love. Because prior to that, I knew who I was, on an everyday basis, but there was never any in-depth feeling behind it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's what I'm saying to you in a way. It's a large group here, so it's one thing. But when we work in small groups of 4 people, 6 people, we listen to each other, learn about each other more, and then see what is the process, what small steps one can take. It's really quite remarkable. I feel the great battle that so many of us are fighting, battles within the family. We are not necessarily fighting a battle in Iraq or Afghanistan or elsewhere. Those battles are there too. But the battles we fight within our families, with our spouses, girlfriends, boyfriends, friends. And so these are battles that remain, they have strong, incredible destructive power. And one learns to see how we can resolve some of our conflicts. And so power of sorry, apology, forgiveness, this is quite extraordinary.
Hi. From a collective consciousness awareness and from a global perspective, how do you see forgiveness working in the future to solve our problems, such as the destruction of the planet, et cetera? And what have you been seeing, I guess?
Thank you. Thank you very much. There is a book called The Better Angels of Our Nature, about violence, study of violence, by Harvard professor. And he says over the centuries and millennia, violence has gone down in human beings. Sometimes difficult to believe, but it traces a very interesting history. And because the rule of law, anytime I hurt you, does not mean you hurt me back. An eye for eye, a grave for grave. Now we say, well, you hurt me, I go to an agency called police, and the police will investigate, and hopefully, but we say, we do not take the law in our own hand. And that is a great step forward in human civilization. Not to take the law in your own hand. So whose hand should the law be in? Well, if those hands are polluted, if those hands are not fair, if those hands are not impartial, we say, what's the point of giving my power to somebody else? They are corrupt. But if those hands are fair, if the judges are fair, the police is fair, if those who administer rule of law are fair, then you say, yes, there is a fairness. But I do not go and hurt you because you hurt me. You broke my car, does not mean, therefore, I go and break your car. You set my house on fire, so in order to take my revenge, I say, I'll set your house on fire. No. So we are already what we call civilization. We could say we are moving slowly, sometimes grudgingly, sometimes uncertainly, towards the rule of law. But whose law? And as examples we have come, many times those laws have not been fair to everybody, and some members of the community. But certainly, we must, in the 21st century, we must learn, and our children and grandchildren must learn, that how do we resolve conflict? Not through war, not through weapons, because that seems to me barbaric. That seems to me beastly, that we haven't learned how to resolve our conflicts. Conflicts are there in every society and probably will always be there. Conflicts, seeing the things differently. But how do we resolve those conflicts? That is the sign of civilization. And so from that point of view, I look at it hopefully, that we learn how to resolve with negotiation, more negotiation, more arbitration, more mediators and so on, so that we learn. We have a program that I have watched in Toronto area, children being taught to mediate in the schoolyard. A grade 4 student standing there and say, who gets to use the swing? And so mediating grade 1, 2 grade students, and not running after the principal, not beating each other, not bullying, and it's already working out quite beautifully. So you say, and as you know, so many lives have been destroyed by bullies, and sometimes you think a person is very strong and how could anybody possibly bully this person? But when the stories come out, it say, no, this person was bullied at the age of 8, 9, 10, 12. So how it destroys? Because somebody stronger comes and tries to have his will impose on us. So if we can learn how to resolve in a schoolyard or other situation, this is a wonderful thing to learn. How to resolve conflict, not to dismiss conflict, but how to resolve it peacefully, thoughtfully, reasonably, kindly, compassionately, decently, fairly, justly. Thank you.
Hi. I wanted to ask, sort of to follow up with what this lady said, but you started to speak to it already. My question actually relates to the examples you gave, which most of the examples you gave are of events that are passed with subsequent forgiveness. You just spoke about times when there's conflict and there might be some mediation and you can sort of resolve it during the conflict. I think there probably are times when injustice is happening to people. It may be long, enduring injustice, and I think it would be difficult to forgive while the injustice is happening. So I wonder if you could speak to that, if that question makes any sense to you.
Yeah, thank you. I gave examples from history because they become part of our collective knowledge. We know about it, we can read about it, we can go to the library and check it out. If I gave you examples of a person's lives, you say, I don't know who this person is. We can give examples in a small group saying, this is you, this is me, this is so on. Or we can draw examples from literature, stories, novels, plays, films. Say, look, this is what happened. So say a film like To Kill a Mockingbird. You say, well, here's injustice because of racial factors. So we many times invoke literature or art in order to comment on certain events happening in our lives. Great example, since you're sitting near Salma here, a great playwright, Arthur Miller. Here he's involved in the McCarthy era in 1950s. He does, in order to illustrate that era, where does he draw? He writes the play called Crucible, about the Salem witch hunts. So you can bring history and an event and then make it contemporary 400 years later. So this is how we share with each other. Now, if we were only to say, you know my sister, I know your sister, I know your brother, so then we say, look, this is what's going on here. But otherwise, in a public discourse, in a social space, we must refer to things that are collectively shared.
I just wanted to say that if you've enjoyed Dr. Kumar's talk, he'll be tomorrow at the Danvers campus from 10 to 12:30 and outside at 119. Please join me in thanking with me. Also, if you'd like to buy a copy of his book, some of them are for sale in the back room. Thank you so much.